An army of death marches across the land, intent on reclaiming an artifact of terrible power. The only one with the courage and strength to oppose them is a young wizard's apprentice. But in these troubled times, his choices are unclear. Will he become a savior of the land, or will he give in to temptation and use his dark powers to become a conqueror instead?
Dark Messiah of Might and Magic is a first-person action game and spin-off of the popular Might and Magic strategy game series. In it, you play as a young sorcerer's apprentice named Sereth, who must fight his way through a fantasy kingdom in order to stop an army of the undead from conquering the land. Now, mechanically, the game handles like a first-person shooter. You move and control your character from first-person perspective and interact with objects using the on-screen reticle. During combat, most of the action is based around melee fighting, with you using swords or staffs to attack and defend yourself against various enemies. However, as the game progresses, you'll also have access to magical spells as well as ranged weapons like bows and arrows. Now, story-wise, the game is fairly faithful to the fantasy materials that it is based on. At the start of the game, your evil, totally trustworthy and not at all a dark sorcerer mentor instructs you to collect a magical artifact that has untold powers. This quest will take you far and wide over a fantasy kingdom, but frankly, most of your time will be spent in the sewers, dungeons, and ancient ruins beneath these locations. Now, the gameplay is primarily a mixture of first-person combat and exploration. As you make your way through the levels, you'll fight various enemies and occasionally solve puzzles in order to progress. As you explore the levels, you'll find various new weapons and armor, which will help your character fight better, as well as potions and food, which can restore your health and energy. Now, the game has RPG elements as well, and as you complete levels, you will accumulate skill points. These points can be spent in one of 3 different skill trees in order to improve your magical powers, martial abilities, or esoteric talents. Specialization in one of the 3 trees is important as the game progresses, as you won't be able to use certain weapons or magical spells unless you've unlocked their prerequisites. Now, one of the most distinctive things about Dark Messiah is that in addition to the hack-and-slash combat that you would expect from this sort of sword and sorcery setting, the game also includes a physics engine. And what makes this interesting is that developers decided not simply to use these physics models for the game's random object collisions, no, they actually integrated them into the fighting and puzzle solving. And what this means is enemies can be pushed, objects can be picked up and thrown, barriers can be broken. Even during the course of regular combat, your character has the ability to kick opponents. And normally, this will simply knock them back a little bit. But when timed properly, can actually be used to send them flailing into hazardous obstacles. This whole physics system is a fascinating addition and makes the combat in Dark Messiah stand out amongst its contemporaries. Unfortunately, that which is unique is not always that which is useful. Now, at this point, it would be my intention to talk about the pros and cons of the overall experience of Dark Messiah. But the more I consider it, the more I come to realize that virtually every aspect that I would bring up is painted in shades of gray. That every game element, no matter how fun or inventive, has some flaw hidden just beneath its surface. For instance, here's a basic example. The level design of the game is fairly uneven. On one hand, it includes a lot of entertaining set pieces, whether you're defending a city from an army of undead or exploring ancient ruins filled with marauding orcs. But on the other hand, in between these set pieces, there's a lot of blank stone walls and linear corridors. A moment that always stands out to me is that at one point you're tasked with infiltrating this enemy ship, which at first requires some planning and consideration, but as soon as you're on board you find out that someone has stacked boxes and coils of rope in a specific pattern to make it so that there's only one singular path that allows you to reach the deck and take over the ship. Another area of note is the game's leveling and skill system. At first, it seems fairly well balanced, and you get to choose between being someone that specializes in melee combat, or magical spells, or sneaking around and shooting people from a distance with a bow and arrow. But as the game progresses, a clear divide appears between the efficacy of certain skills. Now you can level up your sneaking and archery skills, only the second half of the game is filled with big set-piece battles where there's nowhere to hide or snipe from. Now you can level up your magic skills, which will unlock some fire and ice spells that allow you to damage enemies and manipulate the environment to a certain degree. Or you can just pick up the mind control spell, which forces enemies to fight each other, which makes it the best option in pretty much, every encounter. Or finally, you could upgrade your melee skill tree, which will allow you to equip stronger weapons and heavier armor. Which sounds good in theory until you realize that all of your swords and all of your spears and all of your knives pale in comparison to a single well-placed boot heel, which conveniently brings me to the game's combat and physics engine, which, like every other part of Dark Messiah, is equal parts majesty and tragedy. Because here's the thing about the physics system in Dark Messiah. It's great, but it's almost too great, and what makes it worse is that it's not proportionally balanced compared to the rest of the combat. Now, during a regular battle, you'll have the option to kick an enemy in order to break their guard. But if you keep kicking an enemy, you can eventually knock them back, which may launch them into a nearby trap or even off of a ledge. Which sounds like a lot of fun, because it is. And not only is it fun, it's honestly the most efficient way to deal with your opponents. And it creates a situation where once you figure out that the best way to fight these guys is to simply kick them to their untimely doom, that's the only thing you're going to want to do. You'll be scouring battlefields, not to ascertain the best plan of attack, but to locate the closest conveniently placed wall of spikes. Ultimately, the combat system in Dark Messiah creates an awkward dichotomy. Kicking dudes off of buildings is tons of fun, and I will never get tired of it. But it also leads to a system where all of the best options are to remove yourself from the fight. And in any situation where you actually have to fight opponents in melee without any physics-based abilities, it just becomes a floaty, disjointed slog of a battle. Ultimately, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic is a hard one to pin down in the end. It's a game of such highs and lows and such inconsistency in between. The presentation is good, the story is adequate, the level design has some great set pieces, but also some annoying linearity. The physics engine, in particular, offers a host of wonderful opportunities, but also offers a showcase for why this sort of thing is not used more often. Since if you don't implement it and balance it with the rest of your game design, it's going to clearly overshadow everything else. Still, in the end, I suppose I'd give Dark Messiah 3 out of 4 stars, but a hesitant recommendation. This is a game that looks like a hack-and-slash action-adventure title, but winds up being closer to a physics-based platformer in its execution. So, as long as you keep that in mind, you should be fine. Alright, well, thanks once again for sticking with me. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm off to save the kingdom. Till next time.
Wait, Sarah, could you do it? Get on board and lower
Ah, Liana, we meet again. A beautiful woman who's also a magician? You just might be the girl for me. Oh, and so forward, my dear. Well, perhaps Oh no. Oh, she's got a bad case of the jazz hands. Yeah, this relationship might not be worth it.